Hey, good morning, Professor Tootle.
Good morning.
So I have this starting of a formulation in my brain. So this will either be a fascinating show or a horrible conversation, and I don't know yet. And so no pressure on you, but it occurred to me recently, and it's a bunch of podcasts I've been listening to, and some Substack articles or something. I assume I didn't think of any of this on my own. Um, but I've had this revelation. Revelation's too melodramatic, but it has occurred to me that we don't have a shared language anymore in America. Well, that's not true either, but it just seems like we're missing each other, maybe intentionally, and so politically intentionally, and then we're all busy people and we don't think about politics much. So unintentionally, we're not communicating well. How's that? That's not overly dramatic. And so my proof is, and sorry to just jump into the topic today, and let me backtrack a second. I don't think there's been any revelations in U.S. Supreme Court decisions today. So we're going to hold that conversation until next Friday. Is that okay?
Sure.
Okay. So the topic today is what is the history of character and honor and integrity? So is this a religious show? Well, I'm sure religion will pop up a bunch in it, but I'm also thinking of the ancient Stoics. So it doesn't have to be religious per se. But so many of my real friends in real life say really disparaging things about the other side. And the other side is in my family and I mean, direct family, not distant family. I have close, very close family friends who voted for Trump, for example. And my record is very clear for the last decade. I'm not an anti-Trumper. I'm a pro-Constitution, but I resent the actions of Trump. I don't care about him as an individual at all. I've never been an anti-Trumper. I think America's too grand to be concentrating on one person. But most people would say, you're an anti Trumper. Yeah, whatever. I get it. And I have very close family members that vote for him and are proud of it and tell me about it if pushed. And so I have a different perspective. I'm not angry at my family members. I don't hate them. But I do think we miscommunicate on what character means and if that's important to the presidency and what honor means when you're debating an issue and what is integrity? And do we need integrity in our actions? The military sure teaches you from Private Brackney to Lieutenant Brackney. The military just reams this into every single soldier, sailor, and Marine. And so that's kind of the context, Professor, that I'm looking for you today in an hour or less to give some kind of historical context about the early settlers. Yeah, the Morgan Freedom National Freedom Society. Yes, they had integrity. They were, or no, they were all they're all criminals from England. Yeah, I have some sense of history through you over the last 5 years, but I think maybe this show might give some handholds for people to make their arguments better instead of saying you're all just communists or you're all Trumpy fascists or it doesn't seem like we're communicating and I don't get it. And I think we should in our 250th year coming up in just a week. I think we should do better as citizens. Okay, I've thrown a bunch of stuff out at you. I'll have some follow-up questions, but I'd like you to give us some insights on American character, human
Okay.
character, but American character in particular. Go.
So I guess I have four uh, topics or four responses.
Lovely.
The first is that it's it's not so much that we don't have a shared language now, it's that we're probably more aware of the just so stories that most people have always used to just sort of get through life. You know, most people
What's a just so? What's a
it
just
means
so?
that we don't really seek truth. What we seek is a story that's good enough to get us through the day. And once we get an answer that doesn't necessarily conflict with one of our own prejudices, that explains whatever question we have, we just move on. In other words, a normal person doesn't say, but is it really the truth? And do I need to challenge this, view that I have? It's like, why is this thing happening? And then once somebody throws out a plausible story that conforms with your own prejudice, you just sort of adopt that and get on with your day.
So,
That's
in other words, in construction, We're not sure the finished carpentry quite match. The corner's not great, but we go, good enough for government work, and we got to move on.
Yeah, but it could also be, why are these darn kids keep parking in this no parking sign? And you say, and somebody comes along and says, well, it's the parents, and you go, okay, yeah, it's your parents, and then you move on. If that's the answer you wanted to hear, and so then that's what you'll accept.
Well, so my instinct says, Professor, that is a human trait from caveman days.
Yeah, that's not something. I mean, Americans are human beings, so we don't get to escape how human beings actually act. Um,
We'd
but
be insufferable if we didn't, if we couldn't
yeah,
just move on.
yeah, but there are some rather unique things
Okay.
about American history that we don't share with every single group of people on Earth. And I guess the first would be the sort of character of especially the people who came to the United States for religious reasons. They were I mean, you can't really overstate how sincere they were about their beliefs. These are people who moved to the wilderness so that they could practice their religions. And that means that those early generations were very sincere, and most of them practiced a form of Christianity, whether they were Puritan or not. And in fact, many of the non-Puritan religions still did this. A lot of them, we still use this word, but we mean something very different by it now. But a lot of them believed in charismatic leadership, which is not leadership of the person who stands in front of us and lies the best. Charismatic leadership means that your inward godliness is outwardly visible. And I think if we think about people in our own lives, we can think of someone who's like that, who we know that who
Well,
should be.
it's described as a spark in the eye. Yeah, they've got a passion and integrity that shines through.
Yeah, and you just know that this person is someone of very high character who would do the right thing when nobody's looking, you know.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
and
I know a ton of those people. I think I know more of those kind of people than any other kind of people.
Well, yeah, and I mean, I think of it. The example of this sometimes is when my kids go to Lakeside, Ohio in the summer, and they don't have bike locks. And you might think that's crazy. How can you ride your bike around a city and not lock it up? Well, there's nobody in that city who steals bikes. So you don't need bike locks because, and that was sort of one of my other three big sort of handholds is that culture predates laws and institutions. That if you have a culture that where nobody steals, you don't necessarily you can be pretty loose and you can give a wide discretion and you don't need a lot of. Actually, this came up last night in a little community meeting as I was talking to a traffic enforcement officer, and he was saying, some neighborhoods clamor for um, like traffic enforcement cameras, but they don't realize that once we install those, it's the people who live in that neighborhood who roll through that stop sign every day on their way to work. And the third or fourth time you get a $300 or $400 ticket, you're going to be the one down complaining to the city. Because in your own mind, what you want to stop is the person who's not from your neighborhood, speeding through your neighborhood. But you don't think about how strict enforcement of that law would affect people who are probably driving safely in your own neighborhood. Anyway, just another sort of side point. And then that was a very strong feeling in the culture of especially the northern colonies. But as time went by,
But Professor, reaching to the conclusion on that, and then you back up. You're suggesting that early culture of the history of the United States, 400 or 500 years ago, still has percolation today in American culture?
It's still, yeah, the remnant of it is there. But I also want to remind you that just because that was the goal of a particular society, um, aside, I wish our fact checker was here today. This is a good question I put to Jake because I don't remember the exact number. But in Puritan colonies, a very sizable minority of children were born out of wedlock.
Hmm.
And I don't know if most Americans would, and it wasn't particularly a big deal. You know, we think it was a big deal because of the Scarlet Letter and stuff like that, but it wasn't a big deal. It was, I mean, you'd say it was semi-scandalous for an individual family, but it wasn't, they weren't out burning people and passing laws and fretting about this because it was a fairly common practice that a lot of the people, when they were married, the women were already pregnant. Um, you should know that um,
They were Puritans were humans too, huh?
yeah, absolutely, and in even the highest aspirations of their top leaders, there was a lot of um, they're all flawed human beings making mistakes. But the next sort of concept that most Americans might not be aware of is among the founding generation in terms of character. And it really is another word that we use very differently today, which is the word fame. The founding generation, they wanted fame, but their definition of fame was not notoriety. It was you want to be known for your public character. So, in other words, your private life had nothing to do with your, fame. That was, between you and God or your family or whatever. But in terms of your civic life, it was almost considered an entirely different thing. That what we wanted out of leaders was the highest public character. Because that
Oh,
was
that's fascinating, Professor. Is that and that likely stayed with us through what, Clinton? And I don't mean to make it all presidential, but or did every president have foibles and sin? But it seems to me when I was growing up in my younger years, looking at Reagan and I don't know, all sorts of leaders, I had that expectation of who I elected. I mean, I wanted them to have public fame of the old term, the way you're describing it. And it seems like we don't care anymore about that at all. It seems like that's a new phenomenon.
it, well, that doesn't mean it didn't come up. I guess the most famous example of that was um, Grover Cleveland, who had a child out of wedlock, and during the campaign, people followed him around chanting "Ma, Ma, where's my pa gone to the White House? Ha ha ha!" So it's not like in the rough and tumble of politics, political opponents didn't try to make hay of anything they could, and in the early republic, the same thing. But usually, what they were, but usually the reason why your opponent would make a charge like that is because it would offend people. I mean, one of the other crazy accusations, John Quincy Adams, when um, was accused of having gaming tables and gambling furniture because he owned a chess set. Like, and so you get these charges in the press that, oh, he's turned the White House into a casino when really it was just that he happened to own a chess set, So political opponents would always try to make great hay out of character issues. So I don't want to pretend that wasn't always the case, but you should just know that in particular at the time of the founding, there was a very common feeling among the people who shaped our founding documents that having high public character was the most important thing. And that the best people to judge who had high public character would be other people of high public character.
Hmm.
Um, that that it was not necessarily something because it's not necessarily always a trait that other people appreciate. Often having a high public character would mean doing things that are unpopular. I'd say if you look at the two most unpopular things in terms of the American public that have ever happened in modern US history in terms of polling, in both cases, the public was wrong. The firing of Douglas MacArthur and the pardoning of Nixon were, as far as the public was concerned, the two most unpopular things any president has ever done. But I think most people looking back on those decisions would say Truman and Ford did the right thing. So there's a push and a pull to um, high public character and how much it can be judged by the public at large. Um, so I guess I don't know if that gives you enough to go on, but here are my four. So these are my four big ideas here that I don't know if we don't have a shared language so much as we are living in a place where we are more aware of the weird beliefs of others. Um, Number two, it has been part of our political culture to emphasize character and honor and integrity. Um, Number three, I guess the one that I brought up first, that part of our culture, even before we had government institutions, we had a lot of people because of their religious beliefs who would look for, who believed, just as a general matter, that the person who should be in charge is the person who has the outward it when the person who is it is outwardly visible that they have inward good traits.
Love that. Repeat three and four again, though. It seemed like they merged into one for me.
Oh, that the religious tradition that came before the American legal tradition, the founding, the during the time of the colonies, that almost every religiously motivated group believed in charismatic leadership, which is the trait that um, the person who should be in charge is the person who outwardly displays inward character.
Okay, cool. So, Professor, in several times throughout other shows, I think we almost had a whole show dedicated to this conversation. You've described the American political debate as between, sorry not to write it down or at least have it handy, but as between a fight over 51 to 49 that we can't win every time, and we should actually respect the 49. Not that we have to agree with it, but we're going to
Well,
fight
it's,
it again.
but I would even say it's more complicated than that because usually in the American political tradition, the 59 or the 51 and the 49 are both rights that we agree people have.
Yeah, we're actually on the same side arguing with
It's
each other.
it's just it's just that we all agree that all Americans have all of these rights, and what our political debate is going to be about is how to balance the rights that you have. So, and
So, like, are you the only person in America that believes that? Like, one Professor Stephen Tootle, and
no,
everybody
I
else
mean,
hates
I,
each other.
I learned it from my professors.
Okay, so there's two of you.
I mean, I'd say anybody who spent time thinking about political history and a little bit of time thinking about political philosophy. But I think one of the things, actually, I think I was just incredibly lucky with some of the people who I studied with. And one of those guys, he's still alive, he's still writing, good old liberal, not a conservative. But his name was George Kotkin, and he just really took American intellectual history very seriously, as in he didn't automatically believe that intellectual history was something that came from Europe. He believed that there was an American intellectual history. Um, and so the stuff that he had us read, he was constantly pushing us to reading American political philosophy. And when I did that, I noticed that that these recurring themes of pluralism are just everywhere in American culture. The application of the understanding that what's happening in America is that you don't have one right, you have many rights. And then the other person who really cemented it for me was, um, you always say that I'm an expert in Soviet and European intellectual history, but really I'm not, because I took, whatever it was, 8 or 9 classes in those areas. That it's not.
A
So when
hundred
you
thousand
said,
times more classes than the rest of us put together.
I know, and I did take them from 2 Beer Prize winners, so it's not like I was a slacker or anything, but really the reason why what I wanted to study was the origin of totalitarianism, and that's and the two guys who I studied under, Steve Miner and Jeffrey Herf, um, Miner, Beer Prize winner, Soviet history, Herf, Beer Prize winner, German history, um, and but the readings that they would give me, uh, and and actually, I told Herf this once. I don't think I could sleep at night until I read Isaiah Berlin. Um, Isaiah Berlin was a Russian-born British political philosopher, but he was, writing a lot during the Cold War, and much of his writing was directed at describing the difference between the West and the totalitarian systems in the Soviet Union and in Nazi Germany. And in his defenses of the West and pluralism, um, it just resonated with all the stuff I'd been reading in American history. And so I don't know if I mean, I guess my background is unique, so maybe I emphasize this more than others because it's the question that I was interested in, you know.
Professor, has there been I don't mean to be insulting to not only your profession, but your passion, your kind of a core belief of who you are, but hasn't there been almost a complete repudiation of this intellectual? Don't we just want what we want when we want it right now? Darn it. I mean,
Yeah, I
heck
mean,
with
in
all this
fact,
stuff.
in you should just know that in colleges across America, virtually nobody teaches intellectual history anymore.
Well, right,
Nobody
because we
teaches
don't like
political history.
intellectuals. We
Yeah.
want what we want now, darn it.
I mean, the teaching of political and intellectual history has just been wiped out in the last 20 some odd years, probably 30 years.
Okay, not only institutionally, but culturally, I'm saying, and politically.
Yeah, I mean, it was starting in the 1990s. I remember in the mid 90s, even as an undergraduate, overhearing conversations of faculty in hiring where, administration would just say, you cannot, we're just not doing this anymore. And at every college where I worked or attended as a student, um, those every history department was purged in the 90s and 2000s.
Okay, I'm going to switch gears slightly to ask a lightning round, which is unfair, but we've had conversations on all these in previous shows, so we can summarize in a lightning round, and then we're going to open it up to Q&A between the four of us. I want to hang some current topics onto your overriding philosophy about character, honor, and integrity in American history to the present. Uh, I have some context for the question. I'm fairly confident, capable in defending all my views, that most of my political views.
I'll be the judge.
What's that?
I said I'll be the judge of that.
Exactly. But I'm comfortable having the debate.
Yeah,
I'm
yeah,
not.
yeah.
They're not
I
like
get it.
hidden. They're not. I'm not insecure about them. I don't feel guilty about them. I happy to proclaim them and have debate about them. And I'm pretty comfortable in debating most people on most topics that I believe in. So I want to kind of hang on some because I also simultaneously have this perspective of what if I'm wrong or what if we're all wrong? We have no idea, in a kind of in a godlike way. We have no idea we're just ants on a weird rubble planet, and also we have no idea of this big concept, the big plan out there, and we're completely wrong. So that intrigues me as well. But I
Well,
want,
getting back to our political philosophy,
yeah,
one of the things I think is underappreciated in the American political and philosophical tradition is um, the American version of pragmatism versus the sort of European version of
oh, keep going.
utilitarian.
What's it? When this is new to me.
Well, in the American version, it's that every now and then we should check and make sure that what we're saying theoretically actually applies in the real world.
Cool.
Whereas in other forms of philosophy, they can go so far down the road of the theoretical or arguing for a kind of radical utilitarianism that whatever makes sense for it now, that's the only thing that matters without putting into context or a, putting an idea into context, um, can lead to just, well, it leads to things like a Holocaust.
Right.
So, because maybe your scientists are wrong, and I've always liked the kind of American view, which is that we have these big ideas and that we're going to point to. And that as long and what Calvin Coolidge said is true, that there is a finality about the declaration that is exceedingly restful. And if all men are created equal, that is final. And if you just take the values of the declaration and you're always working towards them, you're always going to be pointed in the right direction so you can sleep at night. And I'll just say that's been true for my own life because I know that no matter what anyone accuses me of, I know what I'm always trying to do is have the values of the Declaration actually be and continue to be a living fact among every human being on earth. So, and as long as you're trying to do that, and then every now and then check yourself, if you think that, oh, I've gone too far, every now and then just ask yourself, like, am I being a jerk about this? Am I, am I
Mhm.
the only one? Uh, but there has to be something eternal that you're pointed towards. But every now and then, check yourself. And again, one of the reasons, getting back to that political philosopher Isaiah Berlin, he had this great metaphor for describing how human beings understand the truth. He said, human beings understand the truth like a fish understands the Mississippi River. The Mississippi River is really long, and you might be, if you're a fish, there's a current, and you're going in the direction of the current. You can kind of feel that. But the sorry, you mute
No,
yourself.
you're good.
Oh,
You're
okay.
good.
I'm getting some background noise. The um, where was I? Truth.
I've got my family here in town. Surprise
Okay,
over the
yeah.
week.
So you can feel that you're going in the right direction, but you don't know at any given time if you're actually pointed at New Orleans or not. So you need to be a little bit humble as you continue to point yourself at these eternal truths.
So,
And that,
Professor, that seems like an old-fashioned concept right now, too. It seems like humbleness is not a valued character item in today's society. Where it's the opposite. You can't be humble, or otherwise you ain't going to get the job, or the political office, or the money, or the girl. It seems like that's the opposite of where we're going in society. But maybe that's where my fish in the current is.
well, I think that sometimes humility is misinterpreted, or maybe especially this Um, I had this about a year ago, um, you know, talk with my son, and I told him that he needed to humble himself in his math class. And he's like, Dad, what do you think I'm doing? Walking around arrogant, strutting. I was like, son, don't immediately think that I'm being critical of you and pretending like you are being arrogant. But I was like, what is it that is keeping you from asking for help? And he finally admitted after a long conversation, he doesn't want to look foolish. I
Yeah.
said, okay, so what is that in you that says I don't want to look like I'm foolish? Oh, that's pride. So how do we solve pride? Well, we need to say, like, I'm not going to take pride in pretending to know math that I don't know. You know, so the answer is humility. Like,
Yeah.
but too often, especially when we're defensive, we leap to these, you know, oh, do you think I'm arrogant, or do you think or we associate it with its opposite, being a bully or something. And we're not saying that you should be, you know, meek and sit in the corner, you know, uh, because often humility involves great strength of character. Because, think about what actually requires more character. Being the one person to raise your hand and say, I don't understand. You know, and that is so often, uh, you know, it's especially in academics, I've found um, often the one person who raises their hand and says like, does any of this make sense? Uh, in fact, I'll tell you another story about Jeffrey Herf, where we were doing a reading once in a seminar, and we were reading Heidegger, and he gave me the reading, and he said, well, explain this reading from Martin Heidegger. And I said, well, if this means this, and this means this, and this means this. And I said, but to me, it just seems like nonsense. And you could feel that and there were a couple of kids from Ivy schools who maybe didn't think my degrees were as good as theirs, right? And they were like, oh, Tootle, he doesn't understand this great genius Heidegger. And Herf said, did you ever think that the reason it doesn't make sense is because it's nonsense? Like it's nonsense. It doesn't. And every now and then you have to have you have to put your pride aside, because your pride is telling you, I need to agree with these people who went to Ivy League schools, or they're going to think I'm a big dummy. And sometimes you have to do the hard thing, which is to say, I think this is nonsense. And
Fascinating. Well,
anyway,
good for you. That's a nice story for reflection on too. Let me get to the lightning round.
yeah,
Context: the U.S. Supreme Court did have a couple rulings on temporary status and big wins for the Trump administration. We don't need to talk about the details.
I would not even frame it that way.
Fine, let's start.
Yeah,
Let's do that
yeah,
next week.
yeah.
The
Okay,
context,
I'll
though, is
save it for next.
immigration is
Yeah.
in the news. Peter Schramm's essay, though, I'm not. What is it? Born in
Born
America, but in the
American,
wrong
but in the
country.
wrong place. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. That to me doesn't seem an imperative of the American ethic now. If people read that essay, I think a lot of Americans would look at that and go, I don't care. The rules say they can't come in, and I don't
It's
care.
absolutely an imperative of the American ethic. It is not the ethic of the current administration.
But also current culture in America. I think there's a lot of people that I think the administration reflects maybe not a vast majority, but close to half of America.
No, I disagree. I
Love
think
that.
I think that if Americans read Peter Schramm's essay, that 80 to 90% of them would agree with it.
I love that. So that is a request for anyone that listens to this podcast on the 250th anniversary of America to read Peter Schramm's essay on Born an American but in the Wrong Place.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Lovely. Cool. Let's go to a different topic. We've settled this. I'm 99% sure in America. Slavery. For hundreds of thousands of years, humans enslaved other people all around the world. And then all of a sudden, 250 years ish, this is wrong. So I think I'm 99% certain the vast supermajority of humans believe it's just wrong to own another human being. Right? It's just
Well, this is, and now I'll be controversial and say this.
clear.
I think I think that when you put it that way, everybody would say they're against slavery.
Right.
But there is a human tendency to want to use government power to control others
Yeah.
that doesn't ever go away.
So not slavery per se, but
Yeah,
and,
but I
yeah,
mean, if I were to say, like, if I were to try to identify one of my biggest problems with my progressive friends, it's that so many of them really do want to crawl inside the brains of other Americans and be able to force them to be and think, be a different person, think a different way, and and what they want is the government to be able to somehow change human beings.
yeah,
um,
I think that's an articulate way to describe the angst or anger or frustration of normal average Americans and conservatives
well, and if you
against that.
ask them who should be in charge of this, they will always say, like, us. You know,
Yeah.
so it's still an aristocracy wanting to control other human beings.
Yeah. And that's on the left side. Right has a different type of version. I know we don't like left right, but it's a legitimate critique
Well,
that maybe.
under my definition, the left and the right are exactly the same on this issue.
Yeah, fair enough. Concur with based off all our conversations. Another hard one, abortion. Um, 4 years ago, 2 days ago now, Roe v. Wade was overturned, and now there's twice as many abortions in our country than there were 4 years ago before the overturn of abortion, the right to abortion, constitutional right to abortion. And so part of that is technology, medical procedures, and abortion by mail. I get it. A part of it's just change in science. But I'm talking about the character, honor, and integrity of American citizens who both are opposed to abortion and those that believe that they have autonomy over their body and government or some shouldn't be involved in my body's decision. Both to me, and this is a politically incorrect view, I guess, both to me have legitimacy. I can see both extremes if there are extremes on that issue, and there are. How do we know, Professor, on something like abortion? Who has
Well,
character and honor and
you have to
integrity on
start
that issue?
asking more detailed questions about what do you mean by an abortion? Because one of my first question when you said that is, but I wonder if there has been a reduction in the kinds of abortions that most Americans found objectionable. You know, in other words, or if I just need, in most of these things, you kind of have to abandon the polling question and abandon the label from 30 or 40 years ago and start asking about the specific thing that you want to know about. You know, um, I don't know, maybe AI will help us do this, but stop using an either or black or white label and start thinking about what is the principle what is the deeper thing that I'm trying to prevent here. Once you get past the label and then at least you can have some agreed upon data that I don't know might lead to a productive conversation even with
Sure.
somebody who disagrees with you.
So, Professor, that seems like a mature and thoughtful answer. That's great. However, you're one of the most prominent conservative.
Don't say that stuff.
You are. What I can go around Colorado and find hundreds of thousands of people that aren't as prominent as you, maybe even millions.
All right.
You're the top of the top as far as conservative political historians, and and all the special interest groups, all the money, all the power, all the mechanisms. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Nice answer, mature answer, Professor. Are you pro-choice or pro-life? You're not going to get the money with your answer.
I get it, but are we interested in are we a fundraising operation for a 501(c)(3 or like is that what we're here for? Because my question of is what what are we actually trying I don't know. I sometimes have this conversation where I say like, are we in the room of people who are trying to solve this problem, or are we in the room where we're pretending to solve this problem? Do you actually care about um, a particular thing happening and making that less common, or are you just somebody who wants to pretend to care about this issue for some social or political or financial reason? Um,
Okay.
because
Um,
that's a legitimate question. A lot of people don't care about actually solving problems, but some people do. And I always just want to know what room I'm in.
I think that's an extraordinary important question. I have three more before we go to Q&A, and we only have 15 minutes left of the whole show. So, um, eugenics. We have decided that that was just a horrible policy, even though everybody loved it. All the intellectuals loved it. The American population loved it. It was a great idea, eugenics. And then finally, something happened, and we all went, "This is horrible. This is evil." Right? Is that where we're still at?
I hope so, but I hear more disturbing things. The with each passing year, in support of things like slavery, eugenics. And and it does concern me when I hear people in prominent offices or actual elected political leaders who flirting with these ideas. It is shocking to me.
Okay, I think that's a legitimate, concerning retort to that. How we treat gays in society. I thought maybe we were kind of on an evolution of it, but there has been a massive revision of how we treat gays in America. At least that's what I'm observing.
I
Um,
don't detect, I mean, at least, I mean, this just could be where we are, but I certainly haven't seen that.
yeah, in
Um,
Colorado, I've seen it. The left, right, and there's people
but
that are
is it gay and lesbian or is it trans?
trans is off the charts anger. I'm talking about reverting and saying no, it's marriage is between a man and a woman, period. It's in the
Yeah,
Bible. Yeah, I'm seeing it all the time in my circles. It's
I've
a
never, yeah. I mean, I would say at least in my, I mean, here's my newspaper, right? Celebrating the 10th anniversary of the LGBTQ center celebrated by the city council. I don't,
you live in
um,
a liberal college
my,
town.
what's that?
You live in a liberal college town.
No, Trump wins my county handily.
Okay, fair enough. I've got two
So,
more. Two
yeah.
more. Ponder that though on how character, honor, and integrity of people that differ on that issue. And maybe somebody else will have a question on it. I have two. Well, I actually only have one more.
Well,
Gun.
I I can't think of a single person who I've heard object to gay marriage
Oh, yeah, it's interesting. It's in the
in
last
years.
couple of years. I thought it was down to single digits, people that, and now I'd say it's 30% of the Republican Party in Colorado.
Well,
So, and it
could be
surprised
just a
me.
measure of the shrinking of the Republican Party in Colorado too.
Good point. True. That is likely true as well. Last one, then we open up to Q&A. Guns. People that love them, it's my God-given right to defend myself and my family and my interests, my property. And people just think, are you crazy? Kids are getting killed in schoolrooms, and they don't respect each other. They just don't respect each other. They think you're evil if you just are willing to tolerate guns, or somebody who's willing to take guns. How do we determine somebody's character, honor, and integrity on something like guns? And I think I know your answer, but give me something.
Oh, I guess on most of those issues, I understand that they're so emotional that it's almost impossible to, and especially if somebody has a personal experience, um, it's almost impossible to um, I would never question somebody's sincerity or their integrity of their beliefs, um, but for let's say somebody who's um, I guess in the great 80%. um, I guess I would I would be interested in knowing if they would be willing to look at the actual data eh, in an honest way and make policy suggestions based on the actual data, or are they just do they just discount it? Or do they use because almost gun violence is one of those issues that almost all of the data that's published that you can find and is easily available is generated by activists who goose those numbers. And when you start diving a little bit deeper into a lot of the gun violence data, a lot of it falls apart pretty quickly.
So you're saying the activists may not have character, honor, and integrity, but
Well,
you're
they have a different agenda. Their agenda is to raise money and make sure the issue is never solved. But again, what room are we in? Are we in I want to actually solve this problem, or am I someone who wants to pretend to solve this problem and fundraise?
okay. Forgive me for going long. I've got a hard stop here in just a few minutes, but I want to make sure we hear from anyone that wants to chat. Hope, are you still with us or did you sneak out? Try to make it quick question, comment, and a quick
I'm
rant.
here. I don't need to make a comment, but I'm here.
Okay. Well, thanks for being here. And concentrate on driving, darn it. Anyway, thanks for being here. Okay, Jeff or Bart, thoughts or comments or questions for the professor today on character, honor, and integrity. Bart, you're up.
Okay. Hang on. Let me get my camera on too. Okay, now my camera's on. Stephen, can you comment a little bit on George Washington's character? I know it's a huge issue, but I listened to a great podcast about it yesterday, and I thought it's an interesting issue to me because in some ways we have a lot of reasons to thank George Washington. At least I believe anyway,
Yeah,
because he was kind of a remarkable human.
Yeah. And I would say if most of what I was describing for you right there was from a series of essays and it became, or was it just a book by Rick Brookhiser on the character of George Washington? And that's what I did my senior thesis on as an undergraduate, right?
Okay.
And comparing how George Washington conceived of his role to how Dwight Eisenhower conceived of his role. A lot of that was based on first understanding what it was that Washington was driving at, and then how explicitly did Eisenhower want to follow in those footsteps. It'd be interesting to go back and dig up my senior thesis from my senior year in college, I almost said Eisenhower. It was Washington, and the reason why he was chosen for so many roles was because of his unimpeachable public character. He was the one person among all of the founders who everyone agreed had no interest higher than the best interests of his country. Meaning, in other words, every single one of the other founding fathers would look at a John Adams and say, yeah, but his temper, and sometimes he gets a little sensitive because he's jealous, or how Jefferson can be sometimes. He's a little bit sneaky and underhanded, or Hamilton, we don't trust him. He's too smart. He's a schemer. And nobody thought that Washington was the smartest. Nobody thought that he was the one, but he wasn't dumb. I think sometimes people take that too far because they say, "Oh, he was not the great genius." But he was smart. I mean, when you read his actual public and private letters and readings, especially on matters of, I'd say, public political philosophy, he was no dummy. You know, there was a reason why he participated in the revolution, and he really believed this stuff. And that's kind of the point, is that everyone understood that he really believed this stuff. And above all else, no one ever thought that he would betray his country. And let's remember that his country means those ideals. That because that's all the country is. You know, so I don't know if that is adequate, but I would say his greatest contribution and the reason the United States exists today is because of the public character of George Washington. Because so many of our institutions were based on the idea that if we have people who want to be like George Washington, our government will continue to function. And every time we have a president who doesn't have, whose compass is pointed in a different direction, we have suffered.
Quick follow-up question. Are you good, Bart?
The only thing I would follow up with is having said all of that, the other thing I do acknowledge about Washington is that he was a human being and he was flawed.
Yeah.
He owned slaves. I think he expressed discomfort owning slaves, but he couldn't quite figure out how to get out of that box he was in.
But he did think that by the end of his life, he thought he was enacting a revolution to end aristocracy.
Right.
And that it was going to be different every place. And he didn't see the individual manumission of individual slave owners as being morally worse than the manumission policies of states that voted to end it for the whole state.
Mm-hmm.
And he thought, if everybody follows my example, and because one of the things that you had to do in order to free your slaves is you had to get your estate completely out of debt. Because otherwise your slaves wouldn't be freed, they would be sold to someone else.
Yeah. Okay.
So what you had to do is and again, this I think shows his tremendous public character. Difference between Jefferson and Washington is Washington lived very modestly compared to someone like Thomas Jefferson, because Washington wanted to make sure that his estate was debt-free by the time he died. Now, he couldn't free the slaves he didn't own that were in the estate of his wife, but he made sure that as far as his personal finances were concerned, that he freed all of his slaves. And the idea was that would be everyone's following my example in government, everyone should follow my example. And then in a place like Virginia, pretty soon we won't have a lot of people with a financial interest in keeping slavery around, and the state legislature will follow suit, which almost happened a couple of times. They came within a few votes a couple of times of ending slavery in Virginia. So it's not like it was a completely outlandish plan. He thought he was, again, are you in the pretend to end slavery business, or are you actually trying to end slavery? And for people who were actually trying to end slavery, you could make a case that, at least as far as Washington was concerned, he was doing it in the best way possible, in a way that wouldn't be rejected by members of his own class in Virginia. So, again, it's easy to say he's wrong,
right?
Because it didn't end up working. But it fell short by a couple of votes.
Right.
We could
Yeah.
keep talking about this, but we can't do it today. Jeff, do you want one quick bite of the apple before we need to leave?
Sure. Just as I was trying to put all this together in my head and in the context of some of the other podcasts that we've had, I think the most important thing that was said today was Toodle's first point. And it goes back to that, what you guys said long ago, only elites care about process. The integrity, the character, the virtuous representation of our leaders isn't what's most important. People are hearing what they want to hear, and they're not inquiring any further as long as it comports with what they believe. And I think that should be a focus of this group, is to figure out, I called into a radio show yesterday. The question was, what's the one thing you would change about America? And my answer was civics education. But I'm not sure that accomplishes what we're trying to do, which is get people to care about process.
Yeah. I think maybe I always think there's so many wonderful things about civics that are alive and thriving in sports. And if we could somehow get Americans to understand all this stuff that we value in sports that you're living every single day, just apply it to government.
Yeah. Wow, like the rules. Yeah. That's
Yeah.
a good analogy.
I don't know. Maybe we need more education with sports metaphors or something. I don't know.
Yeah, I think you're right, because people intrinsically get it that you want to know what the rules are so you can win. Yeah, but if you don't know what the rules are, how do you know whether you're ever winning or not? Yeah, that's a really good point.
But also look at how people actually spend their time. We say, "Oh, nobody's engaged in civic life," and then you go out and you see how many volunteer youth refs and coaches there are out there every single night and every single weekend, and you go like, actually, we have a thriving civic culture, and it's all about fairness and meritocracy and opportunity and all of the things. It's like sports culture at the youth level, hopefully, it seems like it's reflecting the best of a lot of what we would hope for in civic life.
That would be a nice essay for one of us to write for other people's reflections on it. That's an excellent analogy.
I bet we could get Tom Brasino to write it. That's
I bet we could,
because he'll write about wrestling without being prompted.
Yeah. So is that your request, Professor? Are you going to?
Yeah, next time we talk, I'll...
Excellent. Hope, one last bite at the apple, just in case you want to speak, but you don't have to. You're still driving. You good? Thumbs up
on the wheel. Come on.
All right. I think she's good. All right. I've got a hard stop because I'm going to go tour an elections commission. So, gentlemen, thank you very much. Professor, thank you. Will you continue to think through with us on this kind of topic in our 250th year? It seems like we should be really celebrating or contemplating or commemorating the right things about America, not the weird stuff that we seem to be battling each other on. And not that everything's weird. It just seems like it's not as deep as we should be. We should be thoughtful. At least I.
No, it's absolutely true. I mean, I'm sort of steeped in it every day because it's what I teach. But I was just finished up maybe a week ago on some lectures on World War II, and I just couldn't help think, how I'm so lucky that I've never had to suffer and my children. And I think we just take peace for granted. We think all this happened on accident, and it didn't, so.
Yeah, I think that's the way I'm hearing it. I'm thinking it in an optimistic, hopeful way rather than a doom and gloom, pessimistic way.
Well, it should just be, again, gratitude is the trait that we want to emphasize.
Well, excellent. We're going to end with that word, gratitude. Professor, thank you.
Yeah, have a good one.
Have a great day.
Thanks all.
Thanks, y'all.
Yeah. Bye, everybody.